conference
Jen,
will now be recorded.
it sounds like somebody's taking a shower. Can you guys mute your mics? Nice, thanks. I'd like to call to order the March 9th, 2022 meeting of the Tenino Planning Commission. Let the record show that all commissioners are present with the exception of Aaron Conradi, who has an excused absence. Okay, let's get things started by checking out the agenda for this meeting and get a motion and an approval if it looks okay.
This is Corey. I move to approve the agenda as presented.
Okay.
I'll second, Dave.
Nice. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Moving on, let's take a look at the minutes. Jen, can you pull up the minutes from the last meeting? Thank you. Can you make it a little larger? Oh, do I do that on my end? Oh, yeah, that's good enough. All right, thanks.
Well, I wasn't present, but I can move to approve the February
Well,
minutes as presented.
I mean, I think Dave better do it.
Okay.
I wasn't here either, but
Oh, you weren't. That's right. You're on vacation. Oh, all right.
yeah, so I don't know what we do. I mean, yeah,
Okay.
we're just have to cover
They
it.
look great.
Alex says in the chat that he's unable to unmute. So I guess I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from the February 9th, 2022 meeting as they're presented here. So Alex, if you want to.
I can second it. I think I got it to work. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Awesome. I had to reset. Okay, I'll second it.
I'm not sure if we can actually do it with only two of us who are present, but we'll figure it out later. If we have to redo it, that's fine. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Hey,
Okay. All right, moving on. Public comment. We have no members of the public here. Rennie, do you have a comment that you want to add to the reports section?
I'm good, Will.
Okay.
I'm good. I got nothing.
Okay. Do we have any reports from City Hall? Jen or Dan, have you heard anything? No?
I know some plans were submitted this week for some new homes on Central.
Okay.
I don't know if that's something to share. That's exciting.
Yeah,
That is exciting.
Yeah, they're in plan review right now. I got those over to LG yesterday, so he's got those in plan review right now.
Which houses on Central?
The new plats that they're putting on, the new development up here at the end of Central.
Okay, by the church, yeah.
Yeah, I think they got lots 4 through 7 right now that they want to develop.
Nice. Okay. Thanks for letting us know what's going on with that. We don't have a public hearing.
How's construction at City Hall coming, Jen?
We're moving. We're going back to our front office. Hopefully Friday and Monday. We'll be all the way back in next week. So Wayne can get his office back, and upstairs we're waiting on like a grate to cover a hole in the floor, and they were the wrong size. So we're still waiting on the grate, but council approved last night to have in-person meetings beginning in April. So
Excellent.
it's, you know, it's ink stamped. It's happening.
It's happening. That's good
happening.
news.
It's all happening.
Yeah, nice.
It
Okay.
is.
So
Ready.
unfinished business. Dan, I think you want to talk to us about, do you want to talk about the parklets and streetlets first, or do you want to talk about the demographics for the housing action plan?
Yeah, let's start with the parklets and streeteries.
Okay.
Rainey, Troy, and the mayor and I met with a business owner a handful of weeks ago, chatted about the proposal that he had for a streetery. We kind of walked him through a little bit of the process, kind of what the difference between the two are, and he had a strong preference for a streetery. If you recall, that's the space in front of a business that a business uses and is kind of solely reserved for that business's use for serving. He recognized that he would need to build that at his own cost, and that there would be some paperwork to sign on the city side. We had a
Right.
conversation in City Hall. Everything good?
Yep.
We had a conversation in City Hall, and then walked out to his business site and took a look at the parallel space in front of his unit. And boy, Sussex is really crowned a lot more than you might expect if you're out there. And if you were in the middle of the center line, it's probably like almost, I don't know, maybe 24 inches, maybe 30 inches higher than the sidewalk.
That's what makes it scary.
I mean, it's a lot higher. I was really surprised. So if you recall, some of those construction diagrams had to be built on an angle, and then had, the underlayment was on an angle so that the surface itself could be flat. So he recognized that, and I think that when we were standing out there, I think the largest thing that I observed, and Rainey, you can weigh into on your experience, but it was loud, and it was there were a lot of big trucks rolling through. In fact, I didn't take a picture. I should have, but there was this oversized load that came through in the middle of our conversation, and it had to suck to the middle of the road, and even then it was kind of tight. And so I think we all recognize that that road is it's operated, it's owned by the state in a sense, as part of the state highway. So we have to get an answer from WashDOT on whether they will allow a streetery. The business owner wasn't interested in a streetery or a parklet that wasn't on Sussex. That was, it was too far away from his business, and he didn't feel like he could pay enough attention to it. So they're trying to tee up for a big summer and some publicity that they're going to be getting. So I recommended that they go through the temporary use permit process, which would give them at least 90 days with an almost automatic 90-day renewal. So that gets them half the month. We could also add some conditions in there, which would include the liability paperwork. All of that, I believe, is really hedging on the review by WashDOT.
Mm.
And then he also needs to get paperwork submitted into WashDOT. He needs to have a site plan put together, setbacks in. He just needs every piece of construction document needed, just as if you're applying for a permit for a building. That's
Okay.
required.
So we can look forward to that anytime we do this on Sussex, I guess, then.
I think so. I think if we only have one or two more, I think it's pretty easy to roll it through that way. If it ends up being a permanent thing, I'd like to develop an ordinance based on some of those models that we looked at, just to make sure that the cities can treating all of these the same, or as closely as they can be treated.
Nice. Yeah, when we worked on that 507 improvement project that I've talked about with the bump outs when Fred Evander was the planner, grinding down the road was something that we had talked about as being necessary. We talked about widening the sidewalks on Sussex through the downtown also as part of that, but grinding down the road was going to be something that everybody realized was going to happen. to do much there. But
Sidewalks are they're in pretty decent shape. They're wide enough to kind of split the difference and use a little bit of the sidewalk for a streetery or a parklet.
I meant grind down the crown of the road. If I said sidewalk, I meant the road. Yeah. But yeah. Okay.
Any questions on that for staff?
So Corey and Dave, did you have a chance to watch the last meeting? Are you familiar with what a streetlit versus a parklet is? Can you just say the difference real fast, Dan?
Sure. Yeah. Sorry. I didn't realize. So especially during COVID, but even before that, people were starting to use the public space out in front of their restaurant or their bar for, as kind of overflow outdoor seating. Obviously, we've seen that in like a beer garden setting or in the back of bars a lot, and especially when the smoking stuff got really strict, they started having outdoor areas for people to be able to smoke. And so what a streetery is a streetery is a constructed kind of outdoor dining area or congregating area that is operated by the restaurant or bar, and they use it during the times that they're open. And when they are not open for business, the streetery is kind of closed. They kind of close the doors and put the furniture away or whatever it is they do. That's what a streetery is. Streetery is spelled with like the combination of street and eat put together. So that's how it's spelled. A parklet is a similar situation, but it's not dedicated to a single business. It's more of just a public use of a space, of a parallel parking space in many cases in front of a business. And it's not just for that business's use, it's for general use. And so it's kind of, you don't have to be ordering a cocktail or a soft drink or a donut or a coffee to be able to use the space. So those are both, that's the difference between a parklet and a streetery.
Thanks.
Does a streetery kind of revert to public use in off hours?
It can, but many times the owner will grab the stuff and like pull it into the business, so there won't be anything other than just an open space there. The business owner Rainey and Troy and the mayor and I spoke with it looks like he's gonna do a really good job. He's gonna make this look really nice, and they'll probably pull their furniture in after they're closed.
And does it encroach onto the road itself, or does it just take up sidewalk space?
It takes up the parallel space. If you give me a minute, I'm happy to go grab one of those examples and just show it, share a screen with you if that would be helpful.
I can look at it later. I was just curious. I thought it probably did take up the way you talked, but.
Yeah, it just takes up the parallel parking space or the angled or the nose in parking space. So it doesn't extend out into the travel lane at all. In some cases, they have been using a little bit of the sidewalk depending on the sidewalk width. And I think in front of this business, there's enough width to do that a little bit. And you have to taper it, kind of have to bring it back, butt it up against the curb, or I think in Tenino's case, probably it's going to have to float over the top because that road's crowned so much. In order to get it flat, you're going to have kind of a taper down, don't you think, Rainey?
Absolutely, and that's going to come down to the building standards on what he provides to us with the paperwork, because the thing is how to make that thing level and come out level to the curb, so that way you have a smooth transition from curb onto the platform to go eating, so you can get the ADA requirements that come into play with it. Another thing that was mentioned was possibly doing a step at the curb, which then takes it out of the ADA compliance, because how are you going to get a wheelchair up onto the platform with the step being there? So these are some of the things we're still ironing out and trying to, wait for him to submit some of that paperwork so we can get a design put together and something that's going to be safe for the community at the same time.
Nice.
Exactly. See if I can get one here real quick. So the presentation covered a bunch of model ordinances throughout the state, Spokane, Edmonds, in particular were a few that we looked at. So they have been well implemented throughout the state. Most of them, like in Spokane, they're seasonal because of the snow that they get over there. So we'd have to see what works for Tenino, but we're not setting new ground. A lot of the liability language and indemnification is all set up already. So anything we need to agree to, we need to bring the city attorney in to take a look at the language.
Do we have any, is that it for the updates for the parklets and streetlets or streeteries?
Yeah, let me just show you one real quick here. So Dave, are you able to see that example in Spokane?
Yes, I am.
So you can see how it's flush right here against the curb.
Mhm.
And then it's, got a variety of spaces. This is a parklet that they've got.
Right.
And you can see how it meshes up with kind of the stalls in front and to the back of it. So yeah, that's what I've got for parklets and streeteries. We'll process it under a temporary use permit, and pending permission or review by WashDOT.
Nice.
Okay, so the other item, if there's nothing else on parklets or streeteries, as you all know, the city is the recipient of a housing action plan grant from Department of Commerce. That grant is, the deliverables are due by June 2023. So we have about 14 months or so to work through that. The housing action plan, housing obviously is a big deal throughout the state. This is one of the few times that the legislature has appropriated money for planning in quite some time. So most cities have taken advantage of these grant funds to be able to supplement their comprehensive planning activities. And we're starting off on Tenino's. I think the February meeting or the January meeting is the January meeting, I suppose. We talked a little bit about values and vision and you gave us kind of some insights and talked to us about who we should contact. So thanks for that. Today, we're going to go a little bit over some existing conditions, and I'm going to give you a brief overview of the state guidelines for what a complete housing action plan looks like, and then talk a little bit about some of the demographics we're seeing and pose some questions. So if that sounds good, I will share my screen. I didn't send this to you just because it's pretty dry, but these are the state guidelines for a complete housing action plan. You seeing that? So there's about, I don't know, about nine different pieces that we have to do as a matter of producing this report. This first one here is what we're going to talk a little bit about today. Quantifying existing and projecting housing needs for all income levels, including extremely low income households with documentation of housing and household characteristics, and cost burden households. Then obviously there's strategies and some analysis on trends, strategies on working to minimize displacement of low income residents. That's called, in the sense, gentrification, when a property is redeveloped, pushes certain people out of that property because they can't afford the new product. So there's, that's what usually happens. And then make sure we match up with having a variety of housing types and units, which is this RCW 3678-070 requirement. And the previous meeting, as we mentioned, we're looking for input from a variety of sources, and so we'll initiate that later this spring. But today we're going to look at a few demographics. So if you have those, you can pull those up. If not, I'm going to share, or even if you do, I'm going to share a screen. So I think, is everyone seeing City of Tenino financial and demographic characteristics of household?
Yep.
All right. Rainey,
Yeah, I got you there, Dan.
no need to squint. I'll zoom in here as best I can. Okay, so people have heard of the census, right? I mean, the census is the kind of penultimate statistical effort that the United States goes through every 10 years. The 2020 census ran into this buzzsaw we call COVID. And as a result, some of the information is still not out. And you say, Dan, it's March of 2022. You know, the census was taken on April 1st of 2020. What's the deal? Well, I believe they had some challenges with collecting the information in the middle of COVID, right? COVID kind of popped in March, and then they were supposed to launch the door-to-door census or the mailed form census in April. And so it did go a little sideways. Fortunately, the Census Bureau for the last 15 or 20 years has been running something they call the American Community Survey, the ACS, and that's on a running 5-year average of statistics that they compile. And so most people use that for, you know, intercensal in between the tens. So until we get full census data, we're going to keep using the ACS data. And it's gotten a lot better, and the website's actually pretty decent and somewhat interactive, which is nice. But that's where this information is coming from. It's I believe it's sourced as the 2019 ACS. So you see a couple different columns here. You got Washington, Thurston County, and then Tenino. The estimate in 2019 was that Tenino had 695 occupied housing units. And so these details are based on those occupied housing units. And I wanted to kind of show this to you and then make some commentary on what we are observing in just this really preliminary scan of the housing data. Median household income in Tenino right around 2019, 2020 was just shy of $55,000. Thurston County's median income was 72, and the state's was even a bit higher at 73. So we are seeing a bit lower median income, median household income for the city of Tenino. Now, most of this, I'm guessing, is not going to surprise you. So, but if something does, if something strikes your attention, please interrupt. You're welcome to do that. So a good deal lower median income in Tenino than in other parts of our county and in the state. The median monthly cost, according to ACS, when they surveyed people, was right around $1,100. That is lower by a couple $100 than what you're seeing across the state. So we know that we have a lower median household income, but we also have lower rents or lower mortgage payments. So those are good things, but they mean other things too, right? I mean, there's a reason that those numbers are coming in the way they are. I'll talk about that in a second. This next section is about who's bought a house. If you bought a house, raise your hand. Let me see if you either bought or bought several houses. Okay, there's something called like AMI, right? That's it's a factor of the amount of housing that you should be buying with your annual annual income. So you're not supposed to spend, as kind of a rule of thumb, and it's tried and true, and I'm not sure exactly where it came from, but it's about 30%. You shouldn't be spending more than 30% of your annual income on housing. So that's what this is kind of about. It's asking a question: what is the percentage of your monthly housing costs as a percentage of your household income? So when you spend greater than 20% of your monthly housing costs, that is starting to get a little bit close to where you might be in an unaffordable unit. And if you're spending a lot more than 30%, then you're in an unaffordable situation. You're spending too much of your income on housing, and that means other things are taking a hit, like savings or education or whatever other things.
Food, medicine.
Right, food and medicine, exactly. Gas. It's probably too soon for one of those jokes.
Dan, are they basing these numbers on new construction or old or existing houses?
This is actual existing residents of homes in Tenino. So we've got, remember this number here, this baseline number we have is 695. There are 695 housing units in the city. That's a combination of single family attached, duplexes, triplexes, and apartment homes of 4 or more, and mobile homes. So I have statistics on those. We can chat about that in a second too. But this is, Rainey, the question is, or the answer is, they have about 700 units. So that's of those 700 units, the people living in those units, what are their answers to these questions?
Well, my thinking is if they're basing it off of existing houses at the $1,100 a month that they're paying for their mortgage, those at the time they bought those houses was well under where we are now. I mean, now we sky, a house, I picked mine up for $205 a year and a half ago, and now I'm up to $450 within a year and a half. So they're saying $1,100, but at what price was the house bought to give them that $1,100 a month? Because now if you're buying a house today, you're spending way over $1,100 a month.
Yeah. So I think that's a good point. These 2019 numbers aren't going to reflect the big increases we've seen in the last 2 or 3 years. That's true. What I think it does do, I mean, when you buy a house, your mortgage is it should be generally fixed. I know there are variable, mortgages, and sometimes you end up paying a little more, but this median's picking up both the people who've been in their homes for 20 years and are paying $800, and the people who just moved in last week and are paying $1,800. But what we're trying to, what I don't want to do is just do a data pull and dump it into a report. We're trying to figure out, like, what is this telling us, and what are we going to do with these numbers? What are the issues in the city of Tenino, and what can we use this, rare grant funding from the state for planning to change and how we do things, how we either do development, how we set land aside for residential, how we pay for infrastructure, a whole series of different strategies, including, looking at our development code to see if there's barriers to density or future build outs. So that's kind of the lens that we're going through here. We're trying to find patterns or things that are telling us that we need to kind of change the way we're standard operating procedure for running the city. So we are coming back to this. We do see a higher percentage of households spending greater than 20% of income, even though the monthly median cost is lower. So again, that $54,000, they're spending $1,100. That represents, probably more than they should be spending at that range. Household size, this is about right across the state and in our region. Maybe a small amount of one-person households, a little bit larger. This age of householder is kind of interesting. We definitely have a higher percentage of under 35 house. So we have a bit smaller household size, and then we also have a bit younger household size on the bottom end, and then a really strong amount of people who live in Tenino who are 65 and older. So this middle bracket, this 35 to 64, is a little light for, not too much, maybe especially in this range, but it's a little bit lighter. And I think there's a reason for that. And some of the other statistics that we're pulling have gotten to that. And it really does come down to the type of the housing that we have and the age of the housing we have. So I don't think you have this part in front of you. I can send this out after, but the other ACS spreadsheets that we pulled so far talk about the year the structure is built. And so in Tenino, we have We have 32 homes out of that 695. We have 32 homes that have been built since 2014. So that's now, well, when they took this was about 6 years ago, 6 or 7. I think this information is a little more current than the one we're looking up there, but 32 homes, not too many out of 695. The number of homes that were built in 1979 or earlier is about like 350. So about 42% of the occupied housing units in the city of Tenino are older than some of you in the room. Not you, Dave. There were 139 of those 695 units that were built in 1939 or earlier. That's 20%. 20% of the homes, the occupied homes in the city, were built in 1939 or earlier, before the Second World War. So that's partly why when we're looking at this first set of data, you've got kind of a gap in the middle there, with affordability, with age of householder, with household size. We don't have a lot of new stock. The homes, and we all know from homes that are older, they're either really big or they're pretty tiny, right? There's not a lot in between. There's usually a big manor like Alex lives in, or something a lot smaller, that's got a couple bedrooms and is pushing like 900 square feet or 1,100 square feet. Any hard time, Alex? So what I wanted to if there are any questions about the demographics, I'll do my best to answer at this early stage. But I did want to bounce over to some other things to consider as we move through this. But are there any other kind of just like high level reflections people want to make on housing stock in the city?
I would just say one thing. It seems to me like when you talked about how old our housing stock is, that's going to push down that median monthly cost. And we got a lot of houses built in the 30s and into the 70s. Probably a lot of them were paid off or were purchased for very low amounts. So to me, that means that median monthly cost is probably, I don't know how to explain it, but I would say artificially, not artificially low, but it's lower than what we're seeing today for housing.
Right. I think that's a good point. You want affordable housing, but you don't want it affordable for the wrong reasons. Right.
So I was working on something else with Jen, and I guess there are 835 water bills that go out every month. So that might be more accurate a number than the 695 potentially. I'm not sure how those relate to each other, but
you could have a thought about that, Will, is you could have multiple units on 1 meter, and that's going to result in a single, in a single bill. I bet the utility could figure out the water usage and parse that a little bit if we needed to. It's got 3 times the amount of water as the guy next door. It's probably obvious that they got three units in there.
right.
Yeah, because all the apartment complexes in town are all on one single water bill. And then you got to put into factor too also the businesses that are on the water bills. So
I guess that's true too.
And the schools and the city facilities and, all the fun things.
right.
I've got one more document coming your way that I'll share right now. This is called the Comprehensive Housing Affordability Strategy. It's from the Washington Center for Real Estate Research out of Wazoo. They do stuff, obviously across the state. This is getting to kind of what Dave was mentioning, I think, a bit. And so, are you seeing that new spreadsheet up there?
Yes.
This uses ACS from just about a year earlier. So the numbers, if you look at this total number, it's at 680 versus that 695 that we were using. So there's perhaps the 15 units coming on changed it. But some of the same things with this income distribution of 30%. This is the part I wanted to focus on a little bit, this part in the middle, housing problems, severe housing problems and housing cost burden. I'll tell you what this means down at the bottom, but first let's look at, there are 495, there's that number. There's 495 owner-occupied places, and out of that, 40 of them have at least one of 4 severe housing problems, which is about 8%. That's not awful, but when you look at the renter population, you have 55 out of 190 for a total of 95 out of 680. So quick math is was that like 15% or so of the housing stock in Tenino has at least one of 4 severe housing problems. You're gonna say, well, Dan, what is a severe housing problem? If you look at the footnotes here, the 4 severe housing problems include incomplete kitchen facilities, incomplete plumbing facilities, or more than 1 person per room, or a cost burden greater than 50%. So if you're spending more than 50% of your income to live at the place, you're in that's a really rough place. Yeah, world of hurt, a rough place to be. If your kitchen facilities are incomplete or you have incomplete plumbing facilities, that's a bad deal too. That's starting to get to, Rainey, you would probably comment on the life safety and the livability of a unit like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Property maintenance codes on that alone. I mean,
for sure. That middle one, sorry, this middle one, more than 1 person per room, and you kind of that's kind of a different one, right? Because if you're living with a spouse or a partner in a 1-bedroom apartment, that might be working out just fine for you. This type of thing is saying that would include that counts as having like over like a crowded housing situation is kind of how that's being capitalized. Now the room piece can also be parsed a bit. So if you live in a 2-bedroom house with your spouse and a child, your living room is counting as a room, your family room is counting as a room. It's all of those are rooms. So these are typically situations where it's really a tight, you've got like a 1-bedroom apartment. That would be, if you have 2 people in a 1-bedroom apartment, you're kind of at capacity. So you're going to match up with this severe housing problem overview result. But I think 15% of the homes and the units in Tenino that have some type of condition that's causing it, some concern from at least from the statistical analysis, something to pay attention to. And anecdotally, look, we can walk around town and we can expect some of these things, right? I mean, I'm not going to presume that we could point at which house has what, but we know there are places in town that aren't being kept up as well as they should. And when you have a house that was built in 1937, that stuff gets really difficult to keep up with. So some of the housing stock, the size, the number of people in there, and then the amount of a cost burden situation, I think are all things that are going to roll into some strategies that we'll need to take a look at.
Can I ask a quick question about cost burden?
Sure.
So when we're looking at this, do we, I know rent obviously, or your mortgage payment is part of that. Is it considered like our sewer rates or water rates, those kind of things that go along with living in that house included in that cost burden?
You know what? I wouldn't be able to answer that if the footnote didn't tell us what they meant by it. So what they're saying, the cost burden is the ratio of housing cost to household income. For renters, it's just the gross rent plus utilities. For housing, for owners, it's mortgage, utilities, association fees, insurance, and real estate taxes. So they're trying to capture, your kind of.
Yeah, I didn't read down far enough.
No. That's I wouldn't. Different statistics have different ways to report this out. So I appreciated that these folks included that, because that's how they're doing it. So you can kind of pretty much assume that if it's saying 30%, it is, it's really 30% of their costs. I'm not sure that they're including like streaming features of cable and other, internet and stuff like that in there. It's kind of the basics, water, power, sewer, real estate taxes, insurance, and your mortgage.
But it goes back to me, we're probably missing something, and we got a lot of older housing stock. My guess is utilities and some of those things are going to be more than we would see if we had a newer housing stock. I don't know if this is what does this cover Tenino. I don't know how they would take that into an account, but anyway.
So you're talking, Dave, about efficiencies and heat and energy loss.
Those people living in those older houses probably have like I said, I don't know how they did this, but it seems like they would possibly have more of a burden as far as at least power.
Yeah, I took that note down.
Yeah, and there's lifetime maintenance things as well. I've got some siding that probably needs to be replaced, and roof I'm looking at. These kind of big ticket items that come up with older houses as well. Wiring.
Yeah, good.
Insulation. A lot of those older houses don't even have insulation, and they got newspapers stuck on the walls. Actually, I was talking to somebody earlier today on North Wickman, at the end of North Wickman. She was telling me her house doesn't have insulation in it. It's one of those, older 1930s houses with the old sandstone fireplace. And she said if it wasn't for that fireplace, her electric bill in the wintertime would just be enormous because of that. Those inefficiencies that they don't have anymore. With the new, with the new energy efficiencies we have, they didn't have those standards back then. So people would need to upgrade on those for sure.
There's quite a few homes in Tenino that aren't on permanent foundations. They're kind of on pier blocks, and they have questionable insulation underneath.
Correct. Yeah. That's all. Yeah, a lot of them are all on the timber foundations, basically.
Right.
Yeah. Now we're with the new 2021 when they added the new energy efficiency codes into the building standards, which helps us today, but back then it doesn't help us much. So, how can we get these houses to upgrade with any of that? Would we be able to get any of that grant money to go towards some of those older houses to help those people to upgrade?
Yeah, I think maintenance is a real strategy. Maintenance and prevention and assistance for low-income households is definitely strategies I see throughout housing plans in the state. Trying to help people stay in their homes and maintain their homes and keep them from overusing energy. Any other comments on those statistics at this point? All right. Let's see here. So the last piece today is me posing a few questions to you, and I'll distribute this in an email to allow you to kind of ponder it a bit more. But as we go through this process, we're really looking for help determining the priorities. So should we be looking at affordability? Should we be evaluating multifamily types, flexibility to build ADUs, a variety of housing types across the city? Should we be evaluating smaller units and allowing smaller households, which means higher density for, say, single family detached areas, larger units for larger households, housing for seniors, supportive housing for at-risk residents, emergency short-term housing, tenant protections, resources for maintenance. What do you hear from people who are finding housing a challenge? And then what role should the city play in the strategies to address the area's housing challenges compared to, say, the private sector? In some places, they kind of put that whole onus on the private sector to provide the housing. And some places, the public sector takes a really active role. Most places are somewhere in between with it. So as you think about housing, what should we be prioritizing? And maybe it's, like I said, you don't have to have a fully baked answer, but affordability is kind of an easy one to say, but you know, when you say, hey, let's prioritize affordability, what do you mean by that? Like, how do you get there? Do we allow for higher density? Because higher density means smaller units, which means you can spread the cost of capital over a greater number of units, and you don't have to rent those units or sell those units for quite as much because you built a bunch of them, and you're making your profit as a developer. You're making your profit on the quantity, not quite so much the same margin on. So what are your thoughts as far as values on the priorities of this stuff?
I just had a couple. They all seem important to me, but looking at supportive housing for at-risk residents, I'm all for that, and also all for emergency short-term housing. But I don't know those play a big of a role in Tenino, mainly because we don't have the services here a lot. We're so remote, so people getting help for those type of things, I think is more appropriate to work with on a county level, like they're trying to do. I don't know if we'll ever solve the problem or ever make it work, but I think we should keep it in mind. But I don't know that Tenino's a place. Focusing on those a lot is worthwhile. I think we need to work with the county, Thurston County as a whole, to try to help with those where services are more available and people can get to where they need to be and have transportation options besides the limited ones we have here.
Thanks, Dave. Other thoughts?
Yeah, affordability. When it comes to affordability, the reason I ask about all those other things, because I think affordability is a term that, I mean, there's so many different avenues we could go down to help determine affordability. It's not just the cost of the house, it's our sewer rates. If we can get our sewer rates down, that makes housing more affordable for our residents. If we can provide, whoops, sorry, my battery's getting low. If we can, you know, I'm a renewable energy guy. Some places they have low income where they can get energy. They do develop low income energy projects that help people reduce their utility cost. So my thing around affordability is, let's not just look at the housing or the type of housing. Let's look at the big picture of everything that goes into that housing, them to have to live in a house.
It seems like to me a lot of these actually fit under, are like options to increase the affordability. I mean, multifamily types, flexibility to build ADUs, those would be they're kind of like tools to aid in the affordability, right? Basically, I mean, so they're not really, to me, they're not that different, but just like ways of getting to the main one.
I agree with that too.
I think one thing we can focus on too maybe would be just a variety of housing types. You know, there's going to be people that need really affordable housing and people that are looking for something that can afford a little bit something more. And there's going to be, you know, we've talked about opportunities to build some some multifamily rental type units and that kind of thing. So affordability, I think, is a priority for sure, and I don't really know how to balance that with, you know, bringing in things that are going to add to gentrification and that kind of thing. But I'd like to see kind of a nice spread of housing types as well.
Like at the end of the day, what can the city really do to affect affordability of units? So I know somebody who's like, he's like 19 and he's renting a house with his girlfriend up in Lacey for like $1,500 a month for like just a unit in a fourplex, you know, in Lacey. Nothing special about it or anything. Like, I mean, you were saying before, like, you know, maybe the developer could spread out their, you know, make their money, you know, in a volume situation or something. But would they though? I mean, if they could charge $1,500 a month for like a 1-bedroom apartment, what can we actually do to help that situation, I guess?
I think that's a fair point. I thought what Dave raised as far as the sewer rates is important. You know, you're spreading the cost of that capital investment that the city made a while ago over a broader number of people. So you're not only helping people pay less, but you are increasing the revenue into that system because more people are paying that rate, right? So
Yeah,
I think
a good one.
that seems to be pretty easy to think about, at least. But this is the real challenge in our state, is that there aren't a lot of tools for government to limit profit. You know, and there probably shouldn't be, you know, rules to limit profitability and other things like that for developers, and rent controls against our state constitution, and there's a whole handful of other things. Supply is what I've heard from this group in the past when we've talked about buildable lands, when we've talked about areas of West Tenino that we had expected to build out at, you know, or allowed to be built out at a certain density, and now that isn't going to be possible because of gopher habitat and slopes and, you know, capital costs for roads and water. So cities can, you know, if you've ever been to Texas, and, you know, I think Washington's the best state in the country, so I'm not saying move there, but their houses are a lot cheaper because they have a lot of land, you know, and it's flat and it's dry and it's really inexpensive to build. The easy stuff to build in Washington state in most places has already been built on. And so there's going to be a little bit higher costs, and we've got, you know, different issues that we have to, you know, seismic and other things. The city doesn't have impact fees. Many cities have impact fees. Those are have paid for infrastructure in the past, but those increase the cost of development. I think the impact fee hit per residential unit in Olympia is like $35,000 per unit. So if you're building a 100-unit subdivision, times 35,000 just for the impact fees, you know. So you've got, you know, I'm not a developer. I'd imagine they're passing those costs on to the buyer,
Right.
predominantly.
Hey, well, one thing I would say is that we can do, we talked about ADUs. We have a lot of large lots in our city and people that are struggling with their payments. If we can make ADUs easier for people to develop, I think that could take some pressure off of, you know, you have to have some money to build an ADU is the problem. So the people that are struggling already probably don't have the money to build an ADU, but to some extent, I think we can make, if we made ADUs easier. You know, I'm getting to the age where we're not going to need this big house anymore. We thought about building one that we can move into and rent our house out, you know. So, and I think longer term, that the people that move into the area can think, you know, when they have income and are working, if we made those type of things available, that might in the long term help some affordability things and help people stay in their homes.
I think that's
right now, right now on the ordinances, we're allowed, people are allowed within the city to do up to 1,000 square feet of habitable space on an ADU. It's just what style they decide to do. You can take your attached garage and convert it into an in-law apartment if you wish, or a detached garage, turn it into a 2-bedroom apartment. How many people have the money, the means to do it? That's a good question. That's a question I know I can't answer, but so we have pretty loose guidelines for people to do ADUs within the city limits on their property. Again, it's 1,000 habitable square feet. So if you have a 1,200 square foot garage, you could still, your bathroom's not considered a habitable space. Your laundry room's not a habitable space. Your kitchen is not a habitable space. Your hallway, your closets, all those storages. So that 1,000 square feet of habitable space, there's your bedrooms, your living room, those areas of the house that are used more often than the others.
I didn't realize that. I just thought it's
I
1,000 square foot overall. That makes a big difference actually in building the.
Yeah, it does.
Absolutely. At least that's the way I read the ordinance. I mean, if you guys can feel free to give it a gander yourselves, but that's how I read it, was habitable space. So that makes a big difference on that.
I think an important point was made also that, and I'm not suggesting that supply be found on the outskirts. I think there's a lot of options for infill and supply within, as you said, Dave, large lots. Alex has talked a lot, as others of you have, about building out Tenino that is in a way that is cohesive and consistent and sensitive to the structures and the fabric of what the community already looks like, right? And within town, and having something walkable within Main Street and some of those areas in there. And on our walking tour, we looked at some of those things. So it's likely a multifaceted approach, right? It's not just looking for space outside either the UGA or the corporate boundaries of the city for new development, which is how Hidden Meadows came on board. That's been the most recent example of that. But it's also things like, looking at the land on Central and Park and at the end towards Reynolds that you can, that's ready to go, and you're going to get,
Right.
11 houses there.
And the infrastructure is primarily there, so it reduces the cost of building because a lot of the infrastructure is already in place.
Actually, it might be 9, but yeah, I think there used to be 11 lots. It's not 9 houses now.
Right. Yeah, 10 lots total, but I think 9 houses is what they're doing. And then here's another thing. That's something I read here not too long ago, a couple months back, where like the city of Auburn, what they were starting to do was say, hey, listen, we don't have enough multifamily zoning areas. We have tons of single family zoning areas. So why can't we incorporate more multifamily units in single family zones?
Yeah,
Right,
that's
so
what I
there's
talked about my first meeting when I was talking about not having exclusionary. I think it's called exclusionary zoning versus inclusionary zoning, where you can build basically all types of housing. And I'm guessing there's some restrictions, but you don't have just single family zones anymore.
Correct. Yeah, so you take a single family lot that's a 10,000 square foot lot. Well, if you can get a triplex or a fourplex on there, why not say, hey, let's develop that into one of those versus just a single family house? So you can still get that same, maybe you get that 4,000 or 5,000 square foot, 3 or 4 triplex in there versus a 2,000 or 3,000 square foot house, or even a 1,200 square foot house taking up all that lot for just 1,200 square feet of living. I don't know if that's something that we can do within the city. If we're, with our zoning that we have, can we start loosening up some of those zoning restrictions, the zoning areas that we have?
I think we can. I think we may get pushback from some people in the city, because I think some people would be hesitant to say, oh, we're going to start building fourplexes across from my house, or,
Right.
So that's the question. Or, what of our citizens,
Right. I think we bring it in with the design, what kind of design, we can maybe limit the designs that the people bring in. Obviously, we don't want some cookie cutter looking fourplex that looks like it came out of, I don't want to say like Compton or something like that. It's like, hey, who wants that next door? Obviously, you want something that's aesthetic looking, that fits into the community and to the neighborhood. And we also have that, the problem where we talked about a couple months back where, we are projected growth in the next 20 years. We have to come up with over 1,200 more housing units within the next 20 years. Or was it 5 or I can't remember exactly. I think it was like 500 or 1,200 units needed within the next 20 years. So if we can put these things on single family lots and, maybe even some commercial areas, add some more housing in the commercial areas. I don't know. Those are just some ideas that I kind of been pondering over.
Yeah, this is maybe
Go ahead.
taking a little bit different direction than trying to get up the available stock, but I also want to highlight the resources for maintenance. I think some of the houses that we've got, part of the reason we've got an average cost that's so low is, as we talked about it earlier, is they were bought a long time ago. Then maybe they're paid off, but then maybe there's some of those big ticket maintenance items that are coming up for people that make it hard to keep that place up and keep it nice and keep it livable for a little bit longer term. If we could find resources to help people, do some of those kind of things, stay in their house at a lower cost, I think that's a big benefit to the community.
I agree 100%.
Yeah, so that is the type of stuff that cities can assist with.
Is it pursuing like grants or something?
There are some, there are grants for assisting minor and major home repair. It has to be in certain neighborhoods or block groups based on household income, have to be hitting a certain level of under the median of the county. I think it's low to very low. So it's got to be like I think 40 to 60% of the EMI is what it ends up being. But that program requires someone to administer it and to actually work with the contractors to go out and fix, Mr. Jimenez's roof that has got a hole in it. Then he's applied for grant money, and so they give him $20,000, $5,000 or whatever it ends up being to fix the roof. It's a process.
Can we talk about a little bit what tenant protections, what kind of things does that encompass? I see that on the list.
Yeah, so that's something that the state's asked us to request, to inquire about. That is what you're seeing happen in Seattle and other places across the state where there's protections for the tenants for eviction and extra time for notice of rent changes and things like that to prevent the really quick gentrification of a housing area.
I think there's some places in Oregon, right, where you can only raise the rent so much per year. I don't know if we have anything like that in Washington or not, but.
Right, good point. I think that's true. What about housing for seniors? Can we talk about that real quick? Is that a priority? Housing for seniors comes in lots of different varieties. You see the stuff like you see up off of Yelm Highway and the Briggs YMCA in the Olympia area. You also see a lot of seniors in mobile home parks or RV parks. That's not uncommon either. So it's kind of a spectrum.
Yeah, I think it's very important. I think our population just in general is getting older, and it looks like we have an even bit older population in our city than the rest of the county. And I mean, I just think we owe it to our seniors to do everything we can to make sure they have adequate housing, either in apartments or keeping them in their own housing when possible, because I know it's very hard for seniors to be shoved out of their housing that they lived in their whole life. So for me, it's just as much as a housing issue, it's just a moral issue, is that I think we owe our seniors whatever we can do to keep them in their housing and provide housing that they can they can afford.
How is senior housing, does it have to go through a certain process to get designated that way? Or do developers kind of take the lead on that, or is that something the city would kind of designate this as something that needs to be built as senior housing?
Yeah, I think that's a good comment in the sense that there's not a city limit to not building senior housing, right? It's not like you can't build homes for people over a certain age or under a certain age. So the sense would be that in some places where they have impact fees or certain development requirements for infrastructure, some of those could be waived altogether to incentivize building a certain type of housing. There's also some multifamily tax exemptions and where they don't have to pay property tax on the increased value that improvement brings for a certain amount of time. So like it's usually like a 10 or a 20-year time frame. So if the property that you go build a development on a 2-acre parcel that's worth $200,000, and when you build the infrastructure typically and you're building a bunch of homes, now it's going to be worth $2 million, right? So you're going to pay $2 million worth of taxes for that new parcel. Well, this multifamily tax incentive suppresses that and says, no, you're only going to pay the original cost of the land. And so we're going to allow you to kind of use that cost savings or that extra profit to keep the units affordable or a certain style but it's only in certain areas of the city. It's well, depending on what the ordinance says really, but it's designed to be targeted to promote density in certain places.
And I think we can look at that. I think incentives, when we talk about affordability, I know some people think badly of incentives, but if we're trying to promote certain types of housing, I think we can consider incentives to try to promote those things that we think are important to help with that.
Yeah, if we can keep the cost down for the land developer with those incentives, it makes it worth, with the way you got a lot, like Lacey, you got a lot of those 55 plus communities. But most of them are all, mobile homes or modular homes that are inside those 55 plus communities. But I think Dave, I'm with you. If we can give some sort of an incentive to people to build those things.
I mean, from my perspective, of what I've thought about is, this is not a great example because it's not really, but some places, if you sprinkle a home, you don't have to put the hydrant spacing in. You can have narrower roads. So it's not a dollar cost, but the developers, by doing certain things, can be relieved of some of the requirements that they have to, and make it cheaper for them to develop.
Are the location targeting kind of aspect of those initiatives kind of to get seniors in places that are near things that they need, grocery store, downtown walkability type stuff because of driving issues basically, or?
Yeah, I think that's right. It's a variety of issues, proximity to transit, walkable, shops and boutiques and other things that they can get to.
Kind of dovetail with our, trying to get density in the city core.
Right. That a good recent example is the Copperleaf and Silverleaf developments up off of Briggs and Henderson in the Olympia area, right by the Briggs Y. If you've ever seen that's got a big open field, and that field's been open for a decade or more, right? It used to be a farm and a nursery, and you didn't really see anything. I mean, the Briggs Y was there, but you didn't really see any commercial activity until the Copperleaf and Silverleaf senior housing went in across the street. And now that those are built, there's another senior housing being built on the southeast corner of that, across from the Starbucks that came into the Grange Hall, the old Grange Hall there in Olympia. And now there's a dentist, a pretty killer ice cream store called Humble Cow, and now a brew house, all in that vacant area that had been hadn't been developed on for decades. So I don't think we should, certainly not underestimate the power of those, those types of units.
I think they did an environmental cleanup there too, which was part of it. It was pretty contaminated from the nursery, but it's all clean now.
Yeah. Will the city of Olympia was waiting for a grocery store to, come into the Briggs Village. And
I remember that sign forever, like a Thriftway or something. That was pretty exciting back in the day.
Yeah, and they finally slowly started converting some of that commercial space into higher density residential. And I think in particular, the most dense residential in that whole area is the senior housing at Copperleaf and Silverleaf.
Mm-hmm.
And those folks are like, they'll walk across the street and grab a ice cream or a beer or both.
It's pretty nice.
It's like double fisting,
Couple more years, I might be moving in there. So
I'd say, what's the age cutoff? Oh, I'm ready.
All right. Well, I think I have a lot of good stuff here. I dropped it in the chat, and I also emailed it separately in the text of one of the emails that I had attachments to. I just sent the last attachment that had the housing age one that I referenced. So feel free to send me additional feedback. If you hear stories about people who are having challenges in finding housing in Tenino, that always colors up the reports. That would be helpful, especially if we could end up talking to them. And I think generally there's an affordability issue across our region and across our state. And we all probably would have difficulty getting into our own homes right now with the price that they are. So that's pretty sobering.
yeah, just anecdotal, across the street from me, house just went on the up for rent. Well, it's probably been about a month ago now. Smaller, it's not a huge house, probably 1,500 square feet, maybe. I don't know for sure. The price they were asking was $2,400 and something a month.
Jeez. Ouch.
That's why I said that number of $1,100 a month nowadays doesn't seem real to me. In today's, I don't know. It's the sign's gone, so I don't know if they rented it or they were asking too much and they were stepping back. But yeah, I about died when I went and looked on the door what the rent was for that. And it's an older house. It's old. I doubt it. I didn't look at don't remember the details. I just saw the number and shook my head and walked away. But yeah, and it's older than my house, so. Who knows when it was sold last or how much for, but yeah, how can I couldn't even afford that.
Yeah.
And I feel very fortunate on, our income.
See, you're paying a higher price for less amenities in what
Yeah. So anyway, yeah. I'll try to be more in tune with people and what they're saying about that kind of stuff. Most people I know already have a place or are not struggling, but I know they're out there.
So we'll report back in the April meeting with the findings of our interviews with realtors and builders and bankers and a few other folks that we have contacts with. So thanks for those leads. And we'll also dial into a little bit more of the economics, the market economics behind housing for you. So I appreciate your questions and thanks for the good ideas. And if you have other things, let me know.
I have a question. I look at Zillow once in a while just out of curiosity. Does anybody here know if those seem to be fairly accurate? Because they kind of list estimated cost of rent for different places. You can look and they say, we believe you could rent this place for $1,500 a month. I'm just curious if anybody knows do those seem to be fairly accurate, or they're unrealistic, or?
They are fairly accurate. What they basically are doing with those Zillows and Redfins, what they're basically doing is they're just comping out the area.
Right. Just taking sales information and rent information and trying to match that up to.
Exactly. Taking what's in the neighborhood, what sold for what last, and what rented for what last, and that's how.
I have heard other realtors saying though that nowadays they're low. They're even low for sales anyway. That what Zillow says, they're getting more than what Zillow's saying.
And I have I don't know, people probably called you all and tried to buy your houses at some point over the last couple of years. But I get a little flyer in the mail sometimes from a realtor who sells houses in my neighborhood. Said home sales, the median price went up by 21% year over year. So the median home price in Thurston County was $458,000 in 2020.
Wow.
Yeah, that's crazy. And I hear, and I don't know if it's true for Tenino, that investors are buying a lot of places. It's not individuals buying them, that investors are coming in and buying these places up and making the market even more difficult.
Average days
It's a
on
pretty
the
good
market.
return.
Average days on the market is 7.
Wow.
Yeah. Almost
And,
all houses that I hear selling, it becomes like a bidding war, and they all go for more than they're
More,
asking almost
yeah.
all the time.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks for your presentation, Dan. That was good stuff. I guess, do we have any other announcements?
Can I ask a question real quick? I don't know if
Sure.
the planning commission is the proper place to bring this up. I have gotten some questions about parking on Sussex. You probably heard these too, someplace, and also what our codes are for people living in like a trailer on a property for a while. I think now it says 14 days or something like that. Is this a place, is the planning commission a place to talk about that, or is that something that should go to council?
I don't know. I think it could be.
Yeah. Right now, I can tell you the ordinance on living on or camping on private property is 15 days.
Yeah.
15 on, 15 days off.
I mean,
So-
I've talked to some people about it, and I understand why we have some limits. But when we're talking about what's going on in the world today and people's housing problems, I would like to maybe talk a little bit about if we can relax those rules with some maybe some guidelines that would possibly allow for some longer stays. Like I said, I don't know whether this is the place to do it, but I'm interested in having a discussion. I know there's pluses and minuses to it and reasons why we have time limits set up, but like I told somebody, if it was my kid that didn't have a place to live and I had a mobile trailer, they'd be living on my property in it. And
Yeah.
I would rather just be upfront about it and make some exceptions, or realize this is going to happen, and people don't have to hide it.
Most of that, Dave, relates to the water, power, sewer question. It's not so much that we don't think that there's space, or that people living in trailers or RVs are bad neighbors. It's just that we're making sure that that the effluent's going where it should be, and they're not just pulling the vent and calling it good.
Right. And that's kind of what I want to talk about. What guidelines would it take to make sure that if somebody is going to stay there longer, that they're doing the right things, and
That's definitely, I would definitely I wouldn't mind having an open conversation about that myself, because I'm dealing with it now, with the rent moratorium being off, trying to follow the city ordinances and start, enforcing a lot of these ordinances that over the last couple of years since the pandemic hit, it kind of got lax. And then what's happening, where you got 1, 2, 10, 20, and they just keep growing and growing. And again, what Dan's saying, now you're getting more water usage, you're getting more sewer being put into the system. So by myself, I think that we need to have a conversation about it.
I know we got stuff going on, but at some point I would just like to have that on, have a discussion. Like I said, I'm not no hurry, but
Sure.
when we can fit it in.
Do we have room to do that on our agenda for next meeting, Dan? Do you have a lot of stuff, or is that worth talking about?
I think, I think we could. Yeah,
No.
I think that
We
if
could
you
just
want
make it.
to facilitate a discussion, I'm not sure what we would want to prep unless Rainey wanted to try to run a little mini inventory of how many units we have already in town.
Yeah. Would you be willing to come back and talk to us about maybe the problems that you've witnessed, perhaps, or
Absolutely.
that kind of thing?
So we're thinking on the 5th, on the next April 5th meeting.
Is that when it is? Yeah, I think so.
And if our agenda gets too full with stuff we really need to get done, we could put it off. But whenever we have a light meeting, that would be great.
Yeah,
I mean, I think it does fit in with the affordable housing conversation. So
it really does. I mean, we would just have to make it to where I think personally we would have to have a strict, or at least have them follow a set of guidelines, where right now people are just parking them on their lawn. All right, well, let's make them have a pad put down, or, whether it's crushed rock or concrete, some sort of a parking pad to set it on, and then maybe even some screening around the campers, so it's not such an eyesore off the street. So I've got some ideas that I could definitely, there's just a couple, and I've got a few more that we can put together at the next conversation for sure.
okay, yeah, that would be good.
Right.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you for being willing to do that. And any other announcements? All right, meeting adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.